this. It's like a big product, essentially. And so it means a lot to bottom lines for these big companies. And they treat it really seriously. And that's where celebrity gossip becomes a product in and of itself as well. So,
right.
yeah. And, these allegations are that Baldoni was walking in on Blake Lively while she was breastfeeding. Allegations that he bit her lip during a kissing scene, basically that he acted like a jerk. Nothing here, I think, constitutes like assault, obviously, but he was also sort of walking around clothing himself as in the sort of like moral garb of male feminism. Yes. So then it's like he seems to be orchestrating, or his people seem to be orchestrating, a social media campaign to take clips of Blake Lively and disseminate them and make it look like an organic uprising of people realizing that Blake Lively has always been sort of a jerk. And then he comes in with this lawsuit against the New York Times and gives evidence to Variety suggesting the New York Times, believe it or not, Crystal, was overly gullible. And a lot of people would look at that more cynically and say was, taking is like some type of orders from Blake Lively for something in return. But I think what it looks like is they got drip, drip, drip bits from Blake Lively's team and did not confirm the context, or were ideologically sort of wedded to the Lively narrative and to her side of the story, that they weren't interested in the other context. Because what Baldoni is doing, I don't think he may get a settlement. You're not going to win, I think, this suit against the New York Times. And as a journalist, I don't think he should win the suit against the New York Times, because they're free to publish whatever nonsense they want to, and we're free to say that it's nonsense. But it looks like some of these things, at least from a journalistic standpoint, would have been served by better context. And so the question now becomes whether the New York Times had that context. So, Crystal, what do you make of what we learned yesterday?
Yeah, so just to back up for people who are like me and we're not really following the story outside of my 16-year-old being like, oh my God, Mom, what do you think about this? I'm like, what do I think about it? I don't even know about it. Who's Blake Lively?
There was a lot of TikTok.
That's where I had to start with, is like, who is Blake Lively and who is Justin Baldoni? That was where I had to start with all of this. But effectively, they're co-stars on this movie. It Ends With Us.
Yeah.
Okay. Movie. And the movie, one of the central themes also is around domestic violence. So that's how Justin Baldoni comes to like cloak himself in this, like, I'm an ally and I'm against toxic masculinity. And he's doing a podcast with Liz Plank, who's noted feminist, etc. So he adopts this whole mantle. And during the promotion for this film, neither one of them, they won't appear together. And also, the entertainment media picks up on the fact that a bunch of cast members have unfollowed him. So there seems to be some rift between him and everyone else. So then, according to, some of the texts that have been released, he starts to panic of like, obviously, she's not happy. They're not happy with us. Like, they could really smear us in the press. What can we do to get ahead of that? And I think even without, some of the ways that the Times characterized it, obviously, like they screwed up, right? Like, for example, that quote, about we could bury anyone, et cetera, left out the emoji that would have indicated to readers that they were being sarcastic.
Right.
And they also left out a text that indicated directly that this PR team was actually not responsible for this specific article that appeared. But nevertheless, even putting that aside, he enlisted PR professionals to basically try to get ahead of the story and flip the narrative. So at some point, there seems to be this online organic, like, we don't like Blake Lively and she's kind of a bitch and she was a bitch in this interview. And why is she just out there promoting her like alcohol company when, alcohol can be linked to domestic violence and she doesn't talk about domestic violence at all? There seemed to be this organic anti-Blake Lively narrative that took hold in the public. And so when she gets her side of the story out in this New York Times piece, she alleges, with the aid of the New York Times, that effectively, like, number one, you were inappropriate on the set in any number of ways. You mentioned a few of them: coming into my trailer when, at different times when I was naked, There were some allegations of like body shaming. She just had a baby. There were allegations that there were different boundary violations, and they had sex scenes in this movie. So, you know, it's very fraught, and she's married, and her husband apparently berated Baldoni at one point. So in any case, she alleges that happened, and that there's this orchestrated campaign of retaliation against her. Okay. So
and
now,
Crystal, I'm just going to put up
yeah.
on the screen here. You can see from Variety as an example, one of the juiciest tidbits from the New York Times story was this allegation that Baldoni had basically stormed in on Blake Lively while she was breastfeeding on the set of the movie, and versus the Variety story that I know you were just about to get to, which says, well, the context there, they have text messages of Blake Lively saying, "I'm just pumping in my trailer if you want to work out our lines," and Baldoni saying, "Copy, eating with crew, and we'll head that way."
So effectively, from these texts, it's like, oh, she was like, "Come on over. I'm just here, like pumping," meaning breast milk, in my trailer. If you want to work out our lines, like, come on over. And
or at the very least, that context should have been in the New York Times story, right? So maybe he still barged in or whatever. Maybe there are more text messages saying "knock before you come in" or whatever. But it sounds like that should have been in the New York Times story,
right? And then another instance where there was missing context was, they say in the New York Times story that she alleges he showed her a naked video of his wife, which, like, that's like, what are you doing there? And it turns out, not that I still wouldn't be really cool with this, but it turns out the naked video was of her during a home birth. So like the least sexual connotation or context for a nude video that you could possibly get, that also left out of the New York Times piece. So, you know, he had his little PR campaign, which was successful in sort of turning the public against her. Then she fires back with this New York Times story that the New York Times was far too credulous about at best. At worst, like, actively hid and manipulated some of the things that would be more favorable towards him. And now he's firing back with this lawsuit, which also you have to assume, right, it's his lawsuit. This article is based on his side of the story, is also likely cherry picking and leaving out some of the less flattering details for him as well. So some of the core themes here are, number one, like, you know, he went out and draped himself in very intentionally, like that was part of the PR campaign, drapes himself very intentionally in this, I'm an ally of women. I'm like, you know, I'm against toxic masculinity. I'm going to speak out against it. You should never harm women, blah, blah, blah. He's doing this as part of a PR campaign to undermine this very specific woman. So you've got that aspect. Then you have her basically engaging in some of the same behavior in the media, credulously picking it up. So you have that aspect. And then, of course, you just have, you know, the whole specter of the way these two individuals, who are human beings, yes, but also brands with a whole circle of people invested in their brands, who are waging like PR wars against each other. And, you know, the public is being manipulated in any number of ways. And I think that part is very real. And also, like, you know, to go and even layer deeper, and we're about to talk about OpenAI and some of these AI stuff, like, one of the possibilities here is even that chatbots were potentially wielded in this war between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively. And it does just make you, like, this is kind of, you know, it's not that consequential of a story, ultimately, what happened on the set between these two individuals. But it does also make you question, like, how much of what we're being fed by the media, fed on social media, like these, you know, interactions that appear to be real and appear to be organic, how much of this is already just fake, already just, you know, astroturfed, already just completely concocted by somebody for some reason to manipulate you and your perception of reality. And to me, that's like the most kind of like dystopian angle of this, is that we really don't know how much of what we're already consuming on the web and in media is real, and how much is just literally generated like falsely out of whole cloth.
That's why this is damning for the New York Times, because if there's something that should stand between smear campaigns, information operations, and the public, it's the free press. And for the New York Times, they're defending it and saying, but they didn't defend any specifics, to be clear, but they said, we stand by our reporting. But this is a celebrated Me Too reporter at the New York Times who seems to have been, at the very least, taken for a ride by the extremely powerful